Okay, well, welcome and good evening. It's good to be with you. My name is Lisa Ornstein, and I'm a co-founder of Olympia Indivisible, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Olympia Indivisible's very first hybrid Zoom and in-person meeting. Tonight, we are hosting a special educational event, a Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan 101 teach-in led by the Thurston Youth Climate Coalition. Those of us, yeah. So those of us who are in 3 dimensions at the moment are gathered in the social room at Temple Beth at Philo. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Temple for making this space available. Before I go any further, please note that this meeting is being recorded. If you are on Zoom right now and do not wish your image to appear, this is a good opportunity for you to turn off your camera. We'll be spending this hour digging into the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, but before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that this event takes place on the traditional homelands of the Stechos people, the Nisqually tribe, the Squaxin Island tribe, and the Coast Salish and Lushootseed-speaking peoples who have lived on and stewarded these lands since time immemorial. Despite being the targets of invasion, occupation, and displacement by white settlers, leading to centuries of trauma, the Stechos people have extended to us the courtesy of a welcome to their home. We are guests and beneficiaries of this welcome. Through this acknowledgement, we signal our participation in the necessary project of reimagining the social contracts between Native people and the rest of us who have shown up through different routes to these Native nations. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is but one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond. So tonight's program runs as follows. For the first 25 minutes or so, we will hear about the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan and the main implementers for each of the 5 main sections of the plan. And then after that, we'll move into a question and answer period that will end at or before 8 p.m., depending upon how many questions there are. If you are in the Zoom room, please drop your questions into the chat anytime during the presentation, and we will start off the Q&A by directing them to the presenters. If you are in the temple, please hang in there until we've gotten through the Zoom questions, and then you can just ask your questions directly to the presenter from your seat. So, spoiler alert, although this is a 101 level teach-in, veteran climate activist Thad Kurtz kindly agreed to be on board in case anyone has some 400 level questions. So bring them on. And a final housekeeping note, whether in person or in Zoom, please keep yourself on mute during the teach-in. So a quick word of introduction about Thurston Youth Climate Coalition, or TYC as they call themselves for short. This group of young climate activists aged 13 to 20 in Thurston County came together in the spring of 2022 to educate both citizens and our local government about the urgency of taking action on climate change. Olympia Indivisible first met TYC when we provided them with peacekeepers for the rally, march, and die-in, which they held at a meeting of the Olympia City Council in May of this year. In August, some of us attended TYC's Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan 101 teach-in at Woodruff Park in Olympia, and we were so impressed by their presentation and the accompanying zine that they produced that we asked them on the spot if they'd consider doing a second presentation, which Olympia Indivisible could share as a hybrid Zoom and in-person meeting, and also record to help them bring their teach-in to a larger audience. Olympia Indivisible also produced an additional 125 copies of TYC's Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan teach-in zine, which they are in the process of sharing with businesses in the Olympia region. Is that right? Okay, got that. Okay. So I'm just going to say Olympia Indivisible deeply appreciates the courage, energy, engagement, and activism of Thurston Youth Climate Coalition. So it's truly a pleasure and an honor to welcome our first presenter, Tio Lewis, who will get things going with an overview of Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan.
Hello, everybody. I am Dio/Peter/Drew/Apollo Lewis. I use he, him pronouns, and I prefer when my names are varied from time to time. Welcome to this space and welcome to Zoom, all of you Zoomers. It is wonderful to have you here. We are the Thurston Youth Climate Coalition, or TYC, and I'm one of the founding members. So we're here to talk about the TCMP, Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. It was passed in 2021 in response to effective activism and advocacy. The overall goal of the plan is to mitigate or lessen Thurston County's emissions by 45% below 2015 levels by 2030 and 85% below by 2050. And important note, that is only for emissions produced in this county, Thurston County, not Washington as a whole. We believe that the beginning of activism is education. So we're hitting you with some 101 facts. It's important to understand the structural breakdown of the TCMP. You'll see in the zines that there is a focus area, which there are 5: buildings and energy, transportation and land use, agriculture and forests, water and waste, and cross-cutting. And under each of those focus areas are strategies. A strategy is what we want to do, and underneath each of those strategies are individual action items. And the individual action items are how we go about doing the thing we want to do. Associated with each action item is a main implementer, which is the entity that will be most involved in whatever action is happening. So we have 4 people, one presenting each section. That should take about 30 minutes or less. And then after that, as Lisa said, we're gonna be doing a Q&A. So keep those in your noggin and let's get it started. Oh, I missed an important step here. To introduce our panelists, first of all, we have Miss Elsie Sable. Wow! We have Laszlo Skelton. We have Leah Major. And me. Thank you. So, first of all, Elsie.
Hi. So the first section we're going to talk about is buildings and energy. If you're in person with the zine, that is the one outlined in yellow. So currently, energy use in residential buildings is this region's largest source of emissions. The first strategy to reduce the energy used in existing residential buildings is by retrofitting them with more electric and efficient utilities. Our local government would do this by, for example, providing tax breaks to landlords and homeowners who install heat pumps in their building. The next strategy is to decrease the energy used in current commercial buildings. They would do this through incentives, grants, and laws. And another way to reduce the energy use across all buildings is education. Our local government will implement programs to educate the public about decreasing energy use in their buildings. So by 2050, this region will need about 55,000 new housing units, and creating those will require a lot of energy. As stricter regulations are passed, the government will provide education and incentives so people can meet these laws while still keeping buildings affordable. Since all of these strategies are accomplished by the local government, the best way to advocate for the implementation of these changes is to engage with the local government. That looks like going to city council or county commissioner meetings and writing letters and calling our local officials. Another strategy to create less emissions with the energy that we do use is to increase the production of local renewable energy. In other words, make solar energy easier and cheaper to access. State action is very important for this part, but local decisions can still make a big impact. A variety of organizations would help in the implementation of this, from local governments to nonprofits like Olympia Community Solar, to homeowners, business owners, and property managers. To advocate for this strategy, you can contact your local officials, get involved with nonprofits, or if you're a building owner, get solar panels. Our final strategy is to convert to cleaner fuel sources. Our local government will do this by passing laws and educating the public about how to transition to cleaner energy sources for buildings. And as always, you can write to your local officials to advocate for this. And that's buildings and energy.
Woo!
Hello, my name is Laszlo Skelton. I use he, they pronouns. I am obviously a member of TYCC and the Avanti Climate Action Club, and I am going to tell you about the transportation and land use section of the TCMP. The first strategy in this section is to set land use policies that increase urban density to support efficient transportation networks and reduce urban sprawl. This is important for reducing our region's emissions because when we live closer to where we work and play and go to school and buy our groceries and all that, then we don't need to drive cars as much, which obviously reduces our emissions. An example of an action for this particular strategy is increasing the number of what's called 20-minute neighborhoods, which are neighborhoods where everything you need for like basic day-to-day life, like grocery stores, can be met within about 20 minutes, so you don't need a car to get around. The second strategy for this section is to increase the efficiency of our transportation system, and this again will help reduce the county's emission by relieving congestion, so drivers spend less time on the road and will burn less fuel. This can include like reevaluating speed limits and like comparing where traffic lights versus roundabouts would be more effective for the road network. The next strategy in this section is increasing the adoption of electric vehicles. Our electricity in Washington State is increasingly coming from renewable sources, which is wonderful, which means also electrifying our transportation can significantly impact our emission levels. One strategy for this is is having local governments require that all new residential construction in the county is built ready for electric vehicles. So like having charging stations already built in just to make it more friendly for those buildings. The fourth transportation land use strategy is to increase the use of public transportation. More people riding public transit means, again, more people out of their cars. A main action included in the TCMP for this is to have intercity transit maintain their fareless bus system, since that is allowing more people than ever to use it and get them out of their cars. The last strategy in this section is to increase the use of active forms of travel, like walking and cycling. This will continue to help reduce our emissions by getting more people out of their cars and improving public health and potentially benefiting low-income and other marginalized communities by reducing the needs for people to buy cars. You can advocate for actions like this by, again, like Elsie said, writing letters or emails to your city council, the county commissioners, and talking to intercity transit. You can also give public comments at city council meetings and get involved in the comprehensive planning process that cities and counties are beginning. And that is it for the transportation and land use section.
Hi guys, I'm back. So next we're going to talk about agriculture, forests, and prairies. While they account for a very small percentage of our county's overall carbon emissions, they can actually help capture carbon for the rest of our county and therefore decrease our net emissions, which is very important. The first strategy is to encourage farms to reduce emissions from manure and fertilizer. This will be accomplished through education, grants, and loans. And the main implementers are the Thurston Conservation District and a program being led by the Washington State University. Our second strategy is expanding our regenerative agriculture. The Thurston Conservation District will provide education to farmers on how to increase organic matter and water retention on their farms. An example of this would be installing drip tape, which decreases the amount of water used since the water goes directly to the roots of their plants. And adding compost back into the soil, which increases the amount of water that it can hold, which decreases runoff. You can support this work by buying food from local organic farmers, as well as volunteering and going to educational events hosted by the Thurston Conservation District. The rest of the strategies in this section are about preserving and maintaining forests and prairies. First, we have reforestation and afforestation. The difference between those is that reforestation is when you plant trees in an area that has been depleted, usually by logging, and afforestation is when you plant trees in a space that wasn't forested before. So this strategy will happen through developing a reforestation program and finding priority areas where reforestation is most important. Next, our local government is working toward maximizing tree canopy on their land. They're establishing a baseline for urban tree canopy and will set goals for increasing urban tree density. And finally, our local governments are supporting habitat conservation plans for endangered and threatened prairie species. You can probably guess this by now, but the way to hold our government accountable and make sure they do all these things is to send letters to our city and local government, as well as call them and attend city council meetings.
Hello. Today I will be talking about the water and waste section of the TCMP. This part of the document addresses that the ways we manage water and waste has a direct impact on the climate because of the methane released from waste decomposition, as well as the transportation and energy needs surrounding the processing of waste and water in general. Luckily for us, Thurston County is ahead of many other local governments in terms of water management because of how our Lot Clean Water Alliance works. So the main focus in this section is to decrease our waste emissions, which have made up a pretty notable portion of overall emissions in the past. So the two overall goals of this section are to reduce wastewater emissions by 20% from the year 2015 to 2030 and reduce per capita solid waste by 10% from the year 2015 to 2030. And these will be measured in progress checks by tons of waste that went into landfills and annual emissions from wastewater. The document also notes that the goals and implementations of this might change as our technology and methods of managing and measuring these things evolve. But the water and waste section is broken down into 5 main strategies. So that would be increasing efficiency of water and wastewater infrastructure, reducing water consumption overall, reducing emissions from wastewater treatment operations, diverting solid waste from landfills, and reducing consumption of carbon-intensive goods and services. So for the first and third strategy, those would be mainly implemented by lot, and while the others would be implemented by local governments of Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey. And for the one regarding the carbon-intensive goods and services, that would need to be a collaboration between the businesses of our county and the government. And in this, the TCMP provides some examples of specific actions in each of these strategies and evaluates their effects in different categories. So the first item in this section would be to make energy use more efficient in our water and sewage treatments by conducting improvements to our infrastructure. And so this is listed as the most impactful specific action on there because it'll be really impactful for our emissions as well as holding value for the ecosystem health and adaptation. And then for the action we have to reduce our water consumption is to start conducting more frequent and more in-depth water audits of government facilities. And then our action for reducing wastewater emissions is to research and implement ways to capture nitrous oxide emissions and analyze the costs and benefits associated with this. And then we have to divert our solid waste. The TCMP recommends more frequent waste audits to be implemented, as well as expanding our county's Waste Less Food program, which is something that we already have, but we just need to make better. And then finally, for reducing carbon-intensive goods, there's an action that would partner with local businesses to reduce the carbon footprint of their supply chains.
I'm back. Hello. In the back of your zines, there will be a section that says cross-cutting. It's the itty-bitty one with the light blue top. So, definition of cross-cutting, because what does that mean? Basically, cross-cutting is the miscellaneous category. It's really about general strategies that citizens and local government can take for mitigation. So, the first strategy is conducting education and outreach across climate mitigation areas. As I said before, the beginning of action is education. How can we expect a citizen to be climate conscious if they don't have the resources or information? An example of this strategy would be a government-funded presentation in an elementary school about recycling. I made that up. That's not a real thing that the city does, but it should be. The second strategy is to enhance monitoring and evaluation of climate mitigation measures and outcomes. That means basically studying the impacts of climate change, specifically on disadvantaged people, the people who are hit the hardest in abnormally hot summers or smoky air. The impacts of climate change are happening now, and many people in our community are feeling the effects firsthand. It's essential that our local government pays attention to the active consequences of climate change, not just future ones. The third and final strategy in cross-cutting is to advocate for climate mitigating state and federal policy. This means that climate justice should be one of the top legislative priorities for our elected officials, and that they'll strive to pass more climate legislation. Our government, by passing this plan, has pledged to advocate for climate mitigation policies, and we must hold them accountable. Now, you already know how to do that. We've been over it. But another important thing is to just continue education, like what you're doing now. It is our local government's responsibility to listen to our concerns and act swiftly in regard to climate change. But the battle starts with us. This event is a great way to get started. Where do you go from here? Now, we will be fielding some questions. Lisa?
Yes, okay. So I have a question from the Zoom room. And this is from a friend of yours, Glenn Anderson. And the question is, a good number of local people do understand the climate crisis and do want to solve problems. But many people do not understand the problems or value the climate or the environment. You spoke of pushing local governments. What would you recommend about in terms of educating and motivating the portion of the general public who are not on board already?
I would say that I think a lot of climate activism is doom focused, and that can be kind of hard to get into and fully empathize with for someone who's not like fully in it already. So if this is just like a peer on peer trying to convince someone, I would point to the beautiful parts of nature, the things we want to be preserved, not just the things that have been taken away. And I think it's not just having that conversation with someone, it's also working to reforest, afforest, planting native wildflower gardens to get our bees to come back. All of the beautiful things about nature that people can appreciate. And then I think that would help them understand why it's important to keep them that way.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
And another strategic approach we can have is trying to figure out if someone is really being stubborn and won't change their mind, and you just can't make them value the things you value. You just need to find an overlap for where their motivations could somehow also correlate with our climate thing. So for me, a lot of the times that's trying to talk to people about how cost effective solving the climate crisis will be if we do it sooner rather than later. Because then if you talk about the economy and jobs and all of that improving, people are going to care more about that sometimes than what we're aiming to do. But it doesn't really matter what their motivation is as long as they help get it done.
Good point.
Thank you so much. I'll take a question from the floor here for the in-person. If there are any.
I'd like to know what you guys find are the climate issues that motivate students that you have contact with, and what are the barriers that they have. So what's your impression of climate conversations in general in your peers?
To talk about the second part of your question, what's like the main inhibitor? I think for a lot of people my age, like we know about the climate crisis and we can agree that it is happening, but there's also a mental health crisis in our country. I don't know if you guys know, and hearing about it makes a lot of my peers feel sad and depressed and like they can't do anything. So it's definitely on our minds. It's just for us activists, it's just a question of whether we can get them into a like active state of mind or or apathetic.
So what causes your climate anxiety, or your peers' climate anxiety?
The prospect that the world that you grew up in, the world that we know now, is not the world we're going to see in 10, 5, 2 years. Yeah, the temperatures, I'm sure all of us in Washington know, like the temperatures are rising at a steady rate. And for me, it's not like I'm going to die out in the heat, but it is a morbid reminder of the more dire consequences that are going to happen in my future. It's not an if, unless we act right now.
And another thing, like when I was like in 5th grade, I remember learning about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and just like the immensity of it blew my mind. And one of the scary things about it is like we, the youth, didn't cause it. We just were born into this world, and now we have this giant problem that we all need to fix.
Another question? It's very quiet in the Zoom room, although.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are times that you've found joy in your organizing and like the most exciting moments of being an activist or like times that you felt like, yes, this is working, this is good?
I really was inspired when we made our report card last year and did the die-in. Obviously, it was great getting to work with other people who are really motivated, but it was also interesting to see the continuity because at OHS we did a report card a couple years before, and it was a very slight improvement, but there was an improvement. And so we kind of saw like maybe if we keep putting pressure on local government, like we can keep seeing this change and hopefully at a faster rate. So that was a positive for me.
I think something that's, like an interesting positive for me is just like seeing people show up. Like I remember the climate rally we did in March. It was just really cool to stand up in front of people and see like, there's so many more people here than I expected. It's so good to feel that energy of just seeing everyone come to like, you guys are all here to support us. So that's just like really cool.
I'm just gonna reiterate Leah's dying on the Olympia City Council floor. I was stuck in that position for 15 minutes like this. And going into that, we were expecting to be asked to leave immediately. And it just came such a shock that they left us there on the floor. And I think in the long run, that is a positive, because I think that made a bigger impact than if we had gone once our minute had ended. And I think that was just such a tangible moment where I watched the video back and I could see the looks on all of the city council members' faces. And I've talked to some city council members afterwards, and that really did make a big impact on them.
I think so.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts about it is kind of what everybody else has been saying, just like seeing people come together like for this cause, because as I've mentioned before, like I feel a lot of climate grief, and it's hard when I'm just like alone and like looking things up on the computer and being like, wow, we really are that screwed. But then I remember for the die-in, we had an art build before it, and it was just like so cool to see like, it wasn't even that many people, but we were all just like so excited to die. Yeah, I really remember that, and it's like one of the things that keeps me going.
Thank you.
I have a question about what feels to me like competing demands of urban density, but tree canopy. And I know that several of the jurisdictions have been developing plans around this or updating their plans around tree canopy. But I wonder if you could speak to how you think we might navigate that. We need more housing. We need more dense housing. We need more housing on public transportation. But it seems like every time I see housing going in, the first thing they do is cut down all the trees.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question.
That is a very good question.
Well, maybe it's our time for our 400.
Yeah, do you want to refer that out to Thad? Thad, I see you're here in a little box on Zoom, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts you would like to share. So.
Hi, this is Thad. This is a complicated question. My own view about it is sort of, if you look at the plan, the expectations for forest sequestration in it are, can you hear me? Yeah, the expectations for forest sequestration in it are really large. The plan envisions our planting 37,000 new acres of forest in the county to absorb about half of the emissions that local action is supposed to take care of. My somewhat cynical view about this is that we told the consultant who did the plan that he had to figure out how to get us to the targets. He couldn't figure out any way for just local action to get us there, and that he put in sequestration at the end to fill that gap. I don't think anybody knows how to plant that 37,000 acres, but the scale of what we're talking about in terms of trees is much, much larger than the scale of sort of the tree coverage that's lost for local development. So my own personal view about this is that I think that I don't think that the climate movement can be involved in politically useful ways in opposing every single development that's going to involve cutting some trees in the urban growth area. I think it's really important for us to have that increased density. And I also think it will be very difficult politically to get us in the position of continually fighting every project that comes along. So I think we need to be thinking about how we might plant a lot of trees, or how we might increase the rotation lengths, so that if you let trees stand for longer, then they actually produce more lumber over time, as well as reduce emissions. That's the only way I've thought of where you actually could both meet lumber needs and reduce emissions at the same time. So I think that's a promising thing to try to think more about. And the state is starting to think some about that, and even in Capitol Forest and in other parts of the state forest operation.
Any further thoughts from our presenters?
I was just going to say, I think it's also really important. This isn't necessarily part of the TCMP, but just as citizens of Olympia, I think it's really important that we shift our focus a little bit to from thinking about sequestration as only trees and forests to thinking about preserving our prairies and preserving our wetlands and hugely preserving our estuaries, because those can all be a huge part of keeping the carbon cycle working properly. So the more we are like ecologically thinking about our estuaries, especially, the better it'll help us meet those goals, because it's going to be really difficult, like Thad said, to meet those goals only with trees. That's going to be a huge amount that we'd have to do.
So do you want to make a proposal for an action item there?
How are you going to save the climate crisis?
Whoa.
How are you going to improve estuaries?
Not necessarily improve, but keep them from being developed on. I know like one good stride we've made is preserving the Mission Creek estuary, because that was totally messed up, out of whack for many years. And in the last like 10 years, that has gotten to be more ecologically healthy. So just being aware, and the more you're involved with marine type organizing and volunteering, things with plankton, etc. I don't have all the answers, but I just think it's important, and I always hear people in Olympia talking about it. So just having that.
You're absolutely right, and let's support the Capitol Lake estuary conversion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if each of you were to pick one action item, maybe one that there's already a campaign around, or one where there's a lot of barriers, be that developers or some other body, which would you pick if you just pick this one?
That is such a good question. For all of those who maybe didn't hear on Zoom, we were asked if we could pick one category that we would most like to focus on, or like that could be completed.
Yeah, and not category, but
the specific strategy. Yeah. If we could choose one of those, what would you choose? I am going to have to go with conduct education and outreach across climate mitigation areas, because I know for me, I was not given the information that I know. I had to look for it and talk and like actively talk to people who knew more than me, which is just not sometimes a thing that is viable for youths and working people. And we are so busy in our lives that I think some government funded outreach and education in schools, in jobs, all of that would make a huge difference.
Would you like to have presentations of evidence-based material presented to you in schools?
Yeah, that would be
Absolutely.
cool.
My turn?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Okay, I've decided. My strategy would be increasing the production of local renewable energy. I think it would be so cool to like drive around Olympia and like see every house that could have a solar panel, like have a solar panel in it. And I just think it just makes a lot of sense because we've got like these like giant solar farms, which obviously do like create a lot of energy and but if we can like take the amount of energy that a solar farm produces and then like spread it out through like a city without using any more land, then that would be cool.
I think for me, it's supporting agricultural practices that help sequester carbon. Sustainable agriculture isn't something I know a lot about, but it's a really, really fascinating subject to me that I want to learn more about. So like helping improve commercial farming practices to make them more environmentally friendly, I think is a really big and important one.
For me, I would say to reduce energy use in existing buildings, because it doesn't really matter if we put a lot of effort into making like one new like platinum LEED certified building if we have like 100 more buildings that are still operating on really inefficient energy.
Thank you for sharing your memory.
So, Lisa here, and I just want to send out a couple of shouts from the Zoom. Let's see, hold the phone. One comes from Barack Gale on behalf of the Temple's Green Team. And Barack says, I'd love to just offer a thank you to the teachers on behalf of the Green Team. So anything you want to shout back to Barack on that?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Temple, for having us. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Warms my heart.
And then one just came in that says, thank you for your activism. Do you have plans to pursue further education or careers in environmental clean energy? We need you. So any responses to that?
I'm gonna go into biology, hopefully wildlife, zoology, conservation type things. So kind of adjacent, yeah.
I'm on my high school sustainable agriculture CTE graduation pathway, and that is something that I want to continue to study. I don't know if that's something I want to work in as a career, but it's something I want to educate myself and others about more.
No, I am not going to do this as a career, but it will be a lifelong commitment that I have made. I just am not interested in having to go to college about it.
I don't know what my career will be, but I do think it will definitely have something about the climate crisis.
Yeah, hand it back.
You've given us a lot of great ideas about different actions we can take. What can we do to support you guys in your activism now, here and now? What kind of help can we give you to elevate your message and your energy to other people besides, tonight? What would be most helpful?
That is a really good question. Thank you. I hate to do the self-promotional moment, but I think the place where we release the most information is our Instagram, which is TYC Coalition. That is correct. And I believe that is in the zine on the back. Yes, it is. We have both our Instagram and our email on the back of the zines. And any events that we're part of, we're definitely going to post on Instagram. And I think also following other climate organizations like the Thurston Climate Action Team, Olympia Indivisible, all those people, just to be in the current information so you can keep showing up to events like these. Moving on.
So I have a question from the Zoom room, which is, this is the perspective of the individual asking the question. It's not meant to be, this is the way things are, but this is what they are observing. And they are wondering why there seem to be relatively few cisgender males engaging in climate activism. So I suppose that would be like a two-parter, maybe, like, do you think that's even a thing? If you do think that's a thing, do you have any thoughts about why that is a thing?
I've been talking a lot, so if anyone wants to cut me off, welcome. Speaking as a trans man, I think we put too much value on trying to get like a bit of every party in, because to be honest, it just turns out that these are the people who cared enough to show up. And I think it is more about the individual mind and the individual priorities and motivations than it is their gender, their sex, their sexuality, all of that. So I think that's not a very important part of the equation.
Thank you.
I have a comment. I think it's wonderful that you are representing many schools. I know it must be a little more difficult for you to operate, but I think it's wonderful that you're representing a much bigger population, hopefully interesting more kids.
Yes, that is definitely our goal.
So I have another question from the Zoom, and I'm just need to paste it into the chat so everybody can see it. And this is again from Glenn, who asks, the final portion of your presentation mentioned national and international policies. Decades ago, when the Kyoto protocols were being negotiated, the US bullied other nations to exclude measuring greenhouse gas emissions from military activities outside a nation's own border, and therefore, by definition, the US's horrible wars in other countries in the past few decades have done zero pollution of the climate. Now, the preparations for the COP27 in Egypt include a proposal to start measuring climate pollution from military activities. Would you support pressuring the United States government to press for adopting this reform?
Of course we would. Yeah, I mean, carbon emissions are carbon emissions. Yep.
And wars are bad.
And wars are bad.
Hand over there.
Do you all take donations?
Yes.
Yes.
We do.
And like, do you have an organization or like some way, like how do you take donations?
That is a wonderful question. That is something we're sort of figuring out. Our parent organization is TCAT, Thurston Climate Action Team. I don't believe we have our own bank account yet, but that is something we're working on. So we do take donations, but it's the teensiest bit sketchy. We just promise that we'll use them correctly. Yes.
I was wondering, I apologize if you covered this already, probably. But so in looking at the TCMP and then in looking at the four main jurisdictions in Thurston County that are supposed to implement it, how have you all assessed those jurisdictions, Lacey, Tumwater, Olympia, and Thurston County itself? Like, how do you think they're doing in their mission to accomplish the TCMP?
So far, the only jurisdiction we've really like dug deep into is Olympia, because that this spring, when we made our report card, that was just grading Olympia on their actions in the TCMP. But based on that and how interesting of a project it was and how it seemed to be somewhat impactful on our city council, I'm hoping that we will continue by researching how Tumwater and Lacey have also done in their agreements to this same deal, and probably carry out looking at those in a similar way that we did with Olympia, so we can get a full picture of Thurston County.
Oh boy, a die-in in Tumwater and a die-in in Lacey, that would be great.
Yes.
That made me think of another question that I have. The way that the agreement, the interjurisdictional agreement exists today is that it only includes Olympia, Tumwater, Lacey, and Thurston County. And I pushed for a time for the Port of Olympia to join that and was told but that the way that the agreement is written is that it only applies to jurisdictions that have land use authority. And I think it would be a very good idea to amend that to allow for other types of jurisdictions like the Port to be included, because then it would also open up the opportunity for school districts to be included in the TCMP. They don't have land use authority, but they, in many cases, have budgets larger than the cities that they serve. So that's maybe more of a comment than anything. I don't know if there's a question there or not.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, good point regardless. Also, what was the grade for Olympia's?
Olympia City Council got a C. Whoa. So not terrible. They got a C- a couple years ago when we graded them. I don't really know how they did comparatively to Lacey and Tumwater, but definitely gonna work on that.
Any other questions? All right. You guys rock the joint.
Yay!
Okay, so I'm coming up to join you all to do closeout, but before I do, I want to know if you've got more messages that you want to share.
I would just like to say to everyone gathered herein that you are doing the work right now, and you are putting in the effort, and you know where your motivations lie. And I hope that this in some way persuaded you to continue with that, because we need you. So thank you very much for having us.